This is week 2 of investing every week in the stock market. I started the series as a way to document my journey in the stock market and in the hopes that I motivate other people to start investing as well, or learning from my mistakes along the way, just so that they don't make the same mistakes. If you're interested, don't forget to smash the like button and the subscribe button. It really helps get this video to the right people who are also interested in money, learning how to invest and save, and just transparency around money, because there are a lot of scams online. This week we have around $500 to invest, plus $80 or $90 in a few of my accounts from dividends that I've earned throughout the month. So let's just say we have around $600 to invest in the stock market. My first buy, as always, is going to be in the S&P 500. The S&P 500 contains 500 of the biggest companies in America. Companies all the way from Microsoft and Apple in the tech sector to manufacturing and finance and even insurance. Anything that you can possibly think of is included in the S&P 500. Historically, this has returned around 10% on average for the last 30 and now even 40 years. And I make sure to invest weekly in the S&P 500 because I do believe in the long-term potential here. The US is the strongest economy in the world, and these companies continue to create massive value, not just for the US, but throughout the world. They're extremely diversified. So I'm going to place a market order for one share. I'm using this ETF called VFV. You don't have to use VFV. You can use any ETF that you want. This is a Vanguard product, but other ETF providers like BlackRock also have their own products. I choose to invest in this just because this is what I started with, and I just feel comfortable with it now. I guess I don't really have a good reason here. So one share of VFV, cue the order, and done. Since the market is closed, you're not going to see this order executed, but just like with my previous video, you can see that those shares were actually bought. Trust me, I promise. I don't know why I would be faking these numbers. It just doesn't make sense. Next buy is in the NASDAQ 100. Just like with the S&P 500, these are 100 of the biggest companies in America. It just so happens to be that the bigger companies in America are tech companies, so this ETF is extremely tech focused. If tech is not your jam, you might want to look elsewhere, but for me, I do believe in the future of technology. Companies like Apple, Microsoft, Google, and even up-and-coming companies in the tech sector continue to add massive value, and if you think about it, all of our life is centered around technology. All of our data, all of our personal things like photos, how we communicate at work, personally, everything is tech. And it just seems to me that this is not going to change anytime soon. So I choose to invest in the NASDAQ 100 through this ETF called HXQ. This is a Global X product. You can invest in any NASDAQ 100 ETF you want. Once again, all of them are going to be pretty similar. But I'm going to go ahead and place an order for one share of HXQ and done. My next buy is going to be in a leverage S&P 500 ETF. The S&P 500 we've already covered before. Leverage adds an extra element to that. Let's say that the ETF is 25% leverage. That is just a complicated way of saying that the returns are going to be magnified by 25%. So if the S&P 500 goes up 10%, this ETF is going to go up 12.5% minus leverage costs, since the ETF provider has to pay interest for their leverage. But there's also a downside. Let's say that the stock market goes down 10%. In this case, the S&P 500, this ETF is going to be down 12.5% plus leverage costs. So let's say around 13%. So there's pros and cons, but as a long-term investor, I do believe in the long-term potential of the S&P 500, and I do think this leverage is going to be beneficial when it comes to holding for 10, 20, or even 30 years. So I'm going to go ahead and buy one share. Actually, I'm going to buy 2 shares of USSL, or the leverage S&P 500 ETF that I choose to invest in. Cue the order and done. My next investment is going to be in the Canadian market. Since I live in Canada, I do want to believe in the Canadian economy, even though it's not doing so well right now. But I choose to invest in the Canadian economy through this ETF called VDY. This is an ETF that also pays a high dividend yield at around 4.5% given the price of the ETF. The Canadian market has lagged the US market over the past few years just because the economy is not as strong as the US, but it has seen a nice recovery since the Bank of Canada has started cutting interest rates, leading to an increase in economic activity, or I should say a perceived increase in economic activity. As you can see, over the past 3 months alone, this ETF is up 11% nearly. So I'm going to go ahead and buy 3 shares, $150, should I? I bought 3 shares of VDY with the added benefit of this actually paying a nice juicy dividend. My next investment is going to be in a leverage all equity ETF. Leverage we've talked about before. All equity basically means that this is diversified not just in the US market or Canadian market, it also holds international markets. An ETF I like in particular is HEQL, or another Global X product, the leverage adds onto the returns, and the diversification of this means that I don't have to worry about just the US economy, if it does badly or not. This also holds a percentage of the Canadian economy and the international economy, so I get some exposure to the international economy as well. Even though the companies in the S&P 500 are internationally diversified, I still think it's good to have some international exposure in your stock portfolio. So I'm going to go ahead and buy one share of HEQL. Cue the order and done. My next investment is going to be in a covered call ETF tracking the S&P 500 through this ETF called HYLD. Covered calls are interesting and pretty controversial in investment circles online, but essentially they sacrifice long-term growth, or some long-term growth I should say, for income now. And this is because they write covered calls on their holdings. I don't invest a lot of money in the covered call ETFs that I hold, but it is a good motivating factor for me to keep on continuing to invest. Seeing HYLD or HDIV that we'll talk about later on pay me distributions every month, and these distributions increasing slowly over time, is a pretty satisfying feeling and keeps me motivated to actually invest more. So I'm gonna go ahead and buy 3 shares of HYLD, or roughly $41. And done. My next buy is going to be an HDIV. This is a covered call ETF tracking the TSX 60, or the Canadian version of the S&P 500. The investment philosophy is also similar here. I like the income. I don't invest a lot of money into this. It's just, once again, that motivating factor of seeing these distributions go up. And if you look at the performance overall, over the last year, it's actually up 17.8%. So even from a return perspective, it hasn't performed badly. If you look at the 5-year return, it's around 6%, but the dividend yield is 12% per year. So I'm going to place an order for 1 share in my TFSA. Done. So now we're just dealing with leftover money in my accounts because of the dividends that I've earned throughout the last month. I'm just going to be buying some HEQL with this, since I believe a leveraged all equity approach is decent for the long run. I don't have enough to buy a whole share of the S&P 500. I do realize I can buy fractional shares, but I think for this month at least, or for this week rather, I am going to be okay buying some more HEQL. Queuing the order. Done. $15 left. I'm just gonna go ahead and hopefully I can buy 1 more share of HYLD. Done. So we just bought some more HYLD. I think that's pretty much it. Those are my accounts, non-registered. I actually have $17 left. I don't want to buy more HYLD just because I want to save this for next week and buy some more S&P 500 or NASDAQ or VDY. I feel like I've bought enough covered calls for today. Let me just check my last account, which is my RRSP. I do have $21 here. I'm going to save this for next week. That is it for this video. If you enjoyed this video, smash the like button and the subscribe button. As always, if you like transparency around money, if you want to learn how to invest more or save better, or just simply learn from my mistakes. If even one person can get motivated to invest or stay consistent with their journey, that would just make these videos even more worth it. I'll see you in the next one.